The storm had ended, but its anger still echoed across the alien plains. Winds hissed through broken metal, and the sky was filled with gray dust that hid the twin suns. What used to be homes were now piles of twisted beams and shattered glass. In the middle of that wreckage stood an alien woman named Sarah, her thin arms trembling as she tried to lift a piece of wall back into place. Her small child, Rin, sat nearby on the cold ground hugging a broken toy. The child's wide silver eyes followed her mother's every move, full of fear and confusion. Their house had been torn apart by the storm that came without warning. The colony's warning towers failed again, just like last time, and once again no one came to help. Sarah's husband had died in the last storm, trying to secure the roof before it collapsed. Now she was alone. Her species had once trusted the humans who came to help build their colony. But after too many accidents, too many losses, the trust had turned to silence. Far beyond the shattered settlement, a small human rover moved slowly over the dunes. Inside, Marcus Hale, a human engineer, scanned the destruction on his screen. He was sent here to check the colony's power systems, not to play hero. But when his scanner picked up life signals in the ruins, he slowed down. Through the cracked windshield, he saw her, an alien mother standing against the wind, trying to lift a fallen support beam twice her size. Her body trembled, her face pale under the dust. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Marcus parked the rover. His mind told him to stay inside. The company rules were clear. Do not interfere with alien reconstruction. But something about that small figure fighting against the storm pulled at him. Maybe it was the way the child clung to her leg. Maybe it was the same feeling he had years ago when Earth's own storms took his home. He stepped out. The cold wind hit him hard, carrying the smell of wet metal and burnt plastic. "Hey!" he called out, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "You need help?" Sarah froze. Her species didn't like human voices. They sounded too sharp, too loud. She turned slightly, her eyes narrowing. "No need," she said in broken English. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a deep pain. Marcus didn't move closer. He looked around the wreckage. Half of her roof was gone, the walls barely standing. The storm would return soon. He glanced at the child, who was coughing softly. "Roof's unstable," Marcus said. "Next wind, it'll fall again." Sarah ignored him, picking up another metal rod. But her hand slipped, and the rod crashed to the ground. The noise made the child cry. She dropped to her knees, covering her face. Marcus felt a twist in his chest. He knew that sound. Helplessness. Without asking again, he grabbed his toolkit and started walking toward the structure. "Just fixing this beam," he said. "Then I'll go." Sarah turned sharply. "Stop! You're not allowed here." "I know," Marcus said, kneeling beside the fallen rod. "But rules don't matter when a roof is falling on a kid." She stared at him, unsure whether to shout or stay silent. Humans had brought disaster before. Machines that broke, walls that fell, promises that vanished. But this man wasn't shouting or ordering. He just worked quietly, tightening a bolt, setting a beam upright. Minutes passed. The sound of tools replaced the sound of the wind. Sarah finally exhaled, her shoulders dropping a little. She picked up another panel and held it in place while Marcus secured it. When the last bolt clicked, the frame stood again, shaky, but stronger. Marcus wiped his forehead, smearing dust across his face. "That should hold for now," he said. Sarah said nothing. But when she saw the small cut on his hand, blood mixing with dirt, she hesitated. From her belt, she took a clean cloth and offered it to him silently. Marcus looked at it, surprised. "Thanks," he said softly. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't angry anymore. It was heavy with something else. Understanding. Rin peeked out from behind his mother's leg and stepped closer. "You human?" the child asked softly. Marcus smiled a little. "Yes, human. Human broke our towers," the child said. He didn't deny it. "Yeah, some humans did. I'm trying to fix that." Sarah watched as her child studied the human's tired face. Marcus stood, wiping his hands, and turned toward the rover. He didn't want to make things worse. "You'll need better shelter for the night," he said over his shoulder. "Storm paths aren't done shifting yet," Sarah frowned. "You leaving?" "Yeah," he said. "Just wanted to make sure the roof didn't crush anyone." He walked back to his rover and climbed inside. The engine hummed to life and dust swirled around the tires. But before he could drive off, he saw the child waving shyly through the cracked window. He smiled and raised his hand back. As the rover rolled away, Sarah looked at the repaired frame above her. The storm had taken almost everything from her, but tonight, for the first time since her husband's death, her home had walls again. And somewhere in the gray distance, the human who helped her drove away through the dust, thinking of 2 alien lives he couldn't forget. That night, as another cold wind howled over the ruins, Sarah sat beside her sleeping child and whispered softly into the dark, "Maybe, not all humans are the same." The next morning came slow and gray. The twin suns hid behind thick clouds and the air still smelled like rust and wet dust. Sarah woke before dawn, her body sore from the night. The repaired roof had held through the night's wind, but cold still crept through the cracks. Her son, Rin, was curled up beside her, wrapped in a worn blanket. Outside, the land looked dead. The colony's central tower stood in silence, half its lights broken. No human officers had come. No alien neighbors offered help. Everyone was too busy fixing their own ruins. Sarah stepped outside, pulling her cloak tight. That's when she saw it, the same rover from yesterday parked at the edge of her field. The human was back. Marcus was unloading metal sheets and tools, his movements slow but sure. His suit was dusty, his face marked by sleeplessness. He didn't call out or wave. He just started working. Sarah walked closer, her voice quiet but firm. "You return, why?" Marcus didn't look up. "That beam you're using? It's bent. Won't last another storm. I brought some replacements." "You not part of our colony," she said. "Why help?" Marcus paused, then smiled faintly. "Because I can," Sarah frowned. That answer didn't make sense. No human had ever helped for free. But he didn't ask for anything. He just set up his tools and began removing broken parts of her wall. The sound of hammering and cutting filled the air again. Rin peeked out from behind the door, watching him curiously. "Mother, he's fixing again," Sarah sighed. "Yes, he is." For the next few hours, Marcus worked in silence. He replaced panels, realigned the roof beams, and used his portable generator to power his drill. Each time he looked around for help, Sarah was there, holding the panels, lifting debris, or bringing him small tools she didn't know the names of. Their communication was simple, short gestures, nods, and looks. Words were few, but they didn't need many. At one point, Marcus accidentally struck his thumb with a hammer. He winced but kept going. Sarah's eyes softened. She didn't know why, but the human's quiet patience unsettled her. Humans were loud and commanding in her memories. Officers barking orders, soldiers laughing during disasters. But this one was different. By noon, the small shelter began to take shape again. The walls were straight, the roof firm. Sarah stood back and stared at it, unsure how to feel. "You could have gone to the main colony," she said softly. "They pay humans there." Marcus shrugged. "Didn't feel right." "You were alone here." Sarah hesitated. "Many are alone." "Yeah," he said quietly. "But I saw you first." There was something in his tone, something that made her look away quickly. Her people avoided eye contact with humans. It felt too personal, but Marcus didn't notice. He just kept working. When the wind began to rise again, he stopped and started packing his tools. "You'll need shelter tonight," he said. "Storm paths are still shifting." "I will stay," she said. "I must protect the home." Marcus nodded. "Then let me stay too." "The rover's heater can keep the kid warm." Sarah stiffened. "No, you are stranger." Marcus smiled faintly. "Fair enough." He turned, walking toward his rover. But halfway there, Rin's voice stopped him. "Wait," the small alien called. "You can stay near." "Mother, it's okay?" Sarah looked at her son's pleading face. The human had done nothing wrong. In fact, his quiet help had given them back walls, warmth, and a little hope. She sighed deeply. "You may stay near, not inside." Marcus nodded gratefully. "Deal." He parked his rover a few meters away and set up a small heat lamp outside. The soft glow spread through the night air, casting golden light over the repaired home. Rin sat by the window, staring at the lamp like it was a star. Inside, Sarah watched from the doorway. Marcus sat by the lamp, eating from a ration pack, silent and still. The wind whispered through the ruins, but for once it didn't sound cruel. Sarah turned to her son. "Do you fear him?" she asked. Rin shook his head. "No, he fixes things." Sarah looked out again. The human was staring at the stormy sky, lost in thought. His face looked tired but peaceful. For the first time since the storm, she felt something other than fear. She didn't know if it was trust or simply exhaustion, but as she closed the door, she whispered softly to herself, maybe he fixes more than just walls. Outside, Marcus looked at the small house glowing faintly in the dark. He smiled to himself. He had built many shelters in his life, but none of them had ever felt alive like this one. He didn't know it yet, but tonight was only the beginning. The second storm rolled in without warning. The air turned cold and the wind began to scream across the plains. The rebuilt walls shook, dust rattling against the patched metal panels. Inside, Sarah held her son close, trying to keep him calm. Rin's small hands clutched at her sleeve. Every thunderclap made him flinch. Outside, Marcus stood beside his rover, scanning the clouds with a small hand device. The readings weren't good. Pressure's dropping fast, he muttered. Wind shear's off the charts. He turned toward Sarah's home and saw the weak flicker of a light inside. He hesitated, then started walking through the biting wind. When he reached the doorway, Sarah was already there, eyes wide, protective. You should go, she said over the howling wind. Your kind have shelter. Marcus shook his head. Your walls won't hold through this one. The frame's too light. Sarah frowned, clutching the door frame. We can endure. Not this, he said firmly. The storm's turning, coming straight from the canyon. It'll tear through here in minutes. Sarah looked at her son, then back at Marcus. She wanted to argue, but the wind roared like a monster outside. Another crash sounded as debris flew past the window. She swallowed hard. Marcus pointed toward his rover. Come inside. It's warm, reinforced, and safe. You and the kid. Sarah's pride and fear battled inside her. Her people had been taught not to rely on humans. But the look in Marcus's eyes wasn't pity, it was concern. Real concern. Rin tugged at her sleeve. Mother, please. She finally nodded. Only until the storm passes. Marcus smiled with relief. That's all I ask. He led them quickly through the gusting wind. The rover door slid open and warm air met their cold skin. Inside, dim lights glowed softly, the space clean and organized. Rin stepped in first, his eyes wide at the strange human technology. Screens, compartments, blinking buttons. Sarah entered next, her cloak dripping with rain. She stood stiffly, unsure what to do. Marcus sealed the door behind them, and the storm outside became a distant growl. You can sit, he said gently, motioning toward a padded seat. Sarah hesitated, then slowly sat down, keeping her son close. Marcus opened a small metal case and took out 2 heat packs, activating them with a click. Warm vapor rose, and he handed one to Sarah. Hold this. It'll help. She accepted it, surprised by the gentle warmth spreading through her hands. For a moment, she forgot how exhausted she was. Marcus opened a ration pack and placed it near them. Food's bland, but safe for most species. Rin sniffed it curiously, then smiled. Smells good, Marcus chuckled softly. That's the nicest thing anyone said about this food. Sarah watched him quietly. The human sat across from them, leaning back against the metal wall, eyes half closed. The soft hum of the rover's power core filled the silence. Outside, the storm battered the world, but in here it was calm. Rin played with one of the buttons on his seat. Mother, this place hums like a heart. Sarah smiled faintly. Yes, a warm heart. Marcus heard her words and looked up. That's what we build them for, he said softly. To keep people safe. Sarah met his gaze. You build much? He nodded. Used to. On Earth after our storms. You had storms too? She asked quietly. He nodded again. Worse than this sometimes. Lost my home once. Lost people too. For a long time, Sarah said nothing. She looked down at her son, then at the floor. Then, you understand? I do, Marcus replied. The wind howled louder, shaking the rover slightly. Rin jumped and Sarah instinctively pulled him close. Marcus adjusted the stabilizers and dimmed the lights. It's all right. We're safe, he said calmly. Minutes turned to hours. The storm outside raged on, but inside the rover time seemed to slow. Rin eventually fell asleep against his mother's lap, the heat pack still warm beside him. Sarah looked at Marcus across the dim light. You could have left, she said softly. Could have, he admitted, but I didn't want to. Why? She asked. He thought for a moment, then said, because sometimes helping someone else helps you too. Sarah didn't know how to reply. She only watched him in silence, her chest tight with an emotion she hadn't felt in a long time. Trust. Outside, lightning flashed across the clouds, lighting the ruined colony for an instant. Inside, the small rover glowed like a safe island in a sea of chaos. When the storm finally began to fade, Marcus glanced out the window and saw the first thin light of dawn breaking through the clouds. He smiled faintly. Looks like it's over. Sarah looked down at her sleeping child and whispered, "For tonight, yes." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure there's something worth waking up to." And as the last echoes of the storm faded into quiet, Sarah realized the human hadn't just given them shelter. He had given them something far rarer. Hope. Morning came slow and golden after the storm. The air was fresh, washed clean by the night's fury. Soft sunlight broke through the thinning clouds, touching the ground like a quiet blessing. Marcus stepped out of the rover, his boots sinking into damp sand. The colony looked wounded but alive. Broken roofs, scattered debris, and trails of smoke rising from half-repaired homes. Yet for the first time since arriving, he saw people moving again. Aliens and humans both, cautious but determined. He turned toward Sarah's rebuilt shelter. The metal walls had survived the storm, though bent in a few places. Through the open door he could see Sarah kneeling beside her son, brushing dust from his hair. The scene made him smile, a mother's small act of normalcy in a world still broken. When Sarah noticed him, she stood, wiping her hands on her cloak. "You stayed," she said quietly, as if still unsure why. Marcus nodded. "Storm wasn't done with you yet." She tilted her head. "And now?" He looked at the home, patchy, fragile, but still standing. "Now we make sure the next one doesn't blow it apart." Sarah frowned. "We will fix again when needed." "That is life here," Marcus shook his head. "It doesn't have to be." He opened his toolkit and pulled out his datapad. With a few quick taps, a glowing image appeared in the air between them. A small home design, sturdier, anchored to the ground. Built from salvaged metal and reinforced glass. Sarah blinked, eyes wide at the hologram. "What is this?" "A better home," Marcus said simply. "One that won't fall every time the wind gets angry." She hesitated. "You would build this for us?" "For both of you," Marcus replied. "You and Rin deserve more than walls that shake." Sarah folded her arms, trying to hide her unease. "Humans do not give without reason." Marcus looked at her, his voice calm. "Maybe this time we do." He turned and began marking the ground outside her hut with a small laser tool, mapping where the new foundation could go. Rin ran out to watch, his small silver eyes full of wonder. "You're building again," the child said, laughing. Marcus smiled. "That's right. But this time, we do it together." For the next few hours, the area filled with sound, metal clanging, drills humming, the soft rhythm of work. Sarah joined in despite her doubts. Marcus showed her how to use the tools safely, how to check weight balance, and how to strengthen joints. His instructions were simple, his tone patient. At first she moved stiffly, unsure of herself. But soon she began to find rhythm. Her hands remembered what it felt like to build something that might last. Rin carried small bolts and wires, handing them to Marcus proudly. "Here, this one's shiny." Marcus laughed softly. "Perfect. Every builder needs an assistant." By midday, sweat covered their faces and the ground around them was littered with scrap. But the foundation was taking shape. Square, steady, and strong. Sarah looked at it with a strange feeling growing inside her. She hadn't felt this kind of purpose since her husband was alive. He used to dream of rebuilding their home properly one day. Now a human was making that dream real. She glanced at Marcus, who was tightening a metal plate. "You build like you've done this before," she said. He nodded without looking up. "Used to build shelters for disaster zones back on Earth. After storms, quakes, fires. We learned to start over fast." "Then you understand loss," she said softly. Marcus paused, meeting her gaze. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "I understand it too well." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt heavy with shared memory. Two people from different worlds connected by the same pain. As the sun dipped low, they finished for the day. The skeleton of the new home stood proud and straight, glowing under the evening light. Rin danced around it, laughing. "It's real. It's really real." Sarah watched her son, then turned to Marcus. He smiles again because of you, she said quietly. Marcus shook his head. No, because of what we're building. Sarah stepped closer, studying him. Why do you help strangers? He hesitated before answering. Because once someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. I promised myself I'd return that kindness someday. Sarah's eyes softened. Then this is your promise? Marcus looked at the rising walls, the laughing child, and the faint light of two suns breaking through the clouds. Yeah, he said with a small smile. This is my promise. As the sky darkened, the colony's lights began to flicker back to life in the distance. The sound of rebuilding echoed across the plain, metal meeting metal, hope meeting hope. And as Marcus stood beside Sarah and Rin, watching the frame of their new home gleam against the fading light, he realized something he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't fixing just walls. He was fixing hearts. By the third sunrise, the new house's frame stood tall, a silver outline against the pale blue sky. It was stronger than anything the colony had seen in years. Word spread quickly. A human was building for an alien widow. At first, most just watched from a distance, but whispers began to spread through the market lanes and cracked comm towers. He's not here to help, one alien murmured. Humans never are. Another added, they build, then they take. Sarah tried to ignore them. Each morning, she and Marcus worked side by side, cutting, welding, measuring. Rin carried bolts and laughed when Marcus made faces to cheer him up. The laughter filled the dusty air like music the colony hadn't heard in a long time, but not everyone was pleased by the sound. By noon, a group of aliens appeared near the construction site. Their leader, a tall male named Corin, crossed his arms. Human, he said loudly, you have no right to build here. Marcus turned, wiping sweat from his forehead. I'm just helping her rebuild, he said calmly. Corin's voice hardened. We do not need human help. Your kind already built our first shelters, and look how they failed. We lost families because of your designs? Sarah stepped forward. He's fixing what others broke. You should be thankful. Corin's eyes flashed. Thankful? My brother died under human metal. The crowd behind him murmured in agreement. Marcus didn't speak. He lowered his head slightly and said, Then I'm sorry for your loss, truly, but if you want me gone, say it. I'll leave right now. Sarah's heart jumped. No, she said quickly. He stays. He promised to finish this home. Corin looked between them, disgusted. You trust him more than your own people? Sarah's voice trembled, but she didn't look away. I trust actions, not words. A long silence followed. The wind carried the smell of burnt metal from distant repairs. Finally, Corin spat on the ground. When his work collapses again, don't come crying to us. He turned and left with his group, their footsteps fading into the dust. Marcus exhaled slowly. That went well, he muttered. Sarah frowned. You should not answer him with peace. He will see it as weakness, Marcus smiled faintly. Or maybe he'll see it as strength later. They went back to work. But as the day wore on, Sarah noticed the change. Some neighbors avoided her. Others whispered when she passed. The colony had always been divided, alien and human. But now the line felt sharper than ever. That evening, when the suns dipped behind the dunes, Marcus lit the small solar lamps around the house. The silver walls gleamed softly under the fading light. Rin ran around laughing. It's shining, Mother. It's shining like the stars. Sarah smiled, but her heart was uneasy. She looked out across the dark plain where Karan's group had vanished. Marcus noticed her expression. You're worried, he said quietly. They will return, she whispered. They do not forget insults. I didn't insult them, he said. In their eyes, you did by helping me. Marcus looked at the glowing house. Then let them come. Maybe when they see what we're building, they'll understand. That night, as they ate near the warm glow of the lamps, Rin asked softly, Why do people hate humans, Mother? Sarah's voice was gentle. Because sometimes we remember pain longer than kindness. Rin tilted his head. But Marcus is kind. Sarah smiled faintly. Yes, he is. Outside, a gust of wind passed through the half-built streets. The lamps flickered, shadows dancing on the metal walls. Marcus stared into the dark, thinking of Earth, of the people who once looked at him the same way after his own mistakes. He turned back to Sarah and said quietly, Tomorrow we finish the roof. She nodded. Yes, tomorrow. But neither of them knew that before the roof could rise, the colony's fear would rise higher. Because kindness in a broken world was the hardest thing to trust. The next morning broke bright and calm. The storm clouds had drifted far away, leaving the sky clear and silver blue. For the first time in weeks, the air smelled clean. Marcus stood outside the nearly finished house, staring at the rising suns. Their light glinted off the metal walls, turning them gold. He smiled faintly. Not bad for a planet that hates architecture, he murmured to himself. Sarah stepped out behind him, carrying a small basket of tools. "We finished today?" she asked, her voice cautious but hopeful. Marcus nodded. "We finished today." Rin came running out, excitement written all over his small face. "The roof! The roof goes on today." He danced in the dust, his laughter echoing through the quiet colony. Even the nearby workers, who had once only watched in silence, now paused to look. Something about that laughter stirred something deep in them. Some smiled. Others frowned and turned away, but Marcus didn't notice. He was too focused on the structure. He had reinforced the base with scrap alloys and sealed every joint with polymer foam to make it weatherproof. The walls were smooth now, shining under the light. All that remained was the roof. Strong, curved, and beautiful. He climbed up, humming softly, while Sarah passed him panels from below. She was no longer hesitant with the tools. Her movements were firm and confident. "You're getting good at this," Marcus said with a grin. Sarah smirked lightly. "I had good teacher," he laughed. Flattery detected. By midday, sweat covered them both. The heat pressed down, but they didn't stop. Piece by piece, the roof came together. Each clang of the hammer felt like a heartbeat, steady and alive. Rin fetched small bolts, handing them up with pride. "Here, Uncle Marcus," the boy called. Marcus paused at the word uncle. He turned, blinking. Sarah froze too, her face flushing slightly. Rin tilted his head. "That's what you are, right? You fix things like uncles do." Marcus smiled softly. "Yeah," he said. "Something like that." They worked until the last piece of metal slid perfectly into place. Marcus secured it, twisted the final bolt, and jumped down. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed like a drumbeat of victory. "It's done," he said, exhaling deeply. Sarah stepped inside first, her hand trembling as she touched the smooth wall. Light filtered in through the skylight Marcus had built, soft rays spilling across the floor. Rin gasped. "It's so bright." "Like the suns live here." Sarah turned slowly, taking in the space, the sturdy walls, the clean floor, the warmth. Her throat tightened. She pressed her palm to her chest. "My husband. He wanted to build like this," she whispered. "He said one day we'd have a home that would never fall again." Marcus looked down, his voice low. "Then he'd be proud of you. You helped make it real." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "No," she said softly. "You made it real." He shook his head. "No, we both did." For a long moment there was silence. Only the gentle hum of the solar panels on the roof filled the air. Outside, the colony workers gathered near the edge, watching. Even Karan stood there, arms crossed, frowning, but his eyes softened slightly as he saw the child dancing inside the glowing home. Sarah noticed him but said nothing. Instead, she turned to Marcus. "This home, it is more than shelter. It feels alive," Marcus smiled, "because it was built with care, not orders." She tilted her head. "Humans build many things, but not all feel alive." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe this is the first one that does." Rin tugged at Sarah's cloak. "Mother, can he stay? Can Uncle Marcus stay with us?" Sarah looked at Marcus. "You have other places, yes? Other colonies to help?" "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "Many, but none like this." Sarah studied him for a moment, then said softly, "Then maybe this can be your place too. Not forever, but for now." Marcus felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Belonging. He looked around at the little home, the shining walls, the laughing child, the soft warmth of sunlight across the floor, and smiled. "For now sounds perfect." As night fell, the house glowed gently under the twin moons. Other aliens began to light their own lamps, inspired by what they'd seen. The colony slowly came alive again, voices, hammers, and laughter filling the air. Sarah stood at the doorway beside Marcus. "They rebuild because they saw you," she said. He shook his head. "They rebuild because they saw you stand with me." She looked at him, her eyes calm and bright. "Then we both gave them something to believe in. The child's laughter rang through the air again, pure and bright. And as the stars shimmered above the new home, Marcus thought to himself, for the first time in a long, long while, this wasn't just a building, it was a promise kept. The days that followed were calm, the kind of peace the colony hadn't known in years. The storm stayed far beyond the horizon, and the air carried the smell of new beginnings. The home Marcus and Sarah had built stood proudly under the twin suns, its walls gleaming like polished silver. It wasn't just a structure anymore, it had become a symbol. Every morning people came to look, some out of curiosity, others out of quiet awe. What began as whispers of suspicion had turned into murmurs of respect. Even those who once mocked Sarah for trusting a human now spoke softly when passing her rebuilt home. Inside, the place felt alive. The walls were lined with small carvings Rin had made, tiny suns, stars, and stick figures holding hands. Sarah had planted flowers from her late husband's garden outside the door. Marcus had rigged up a small energy system so the lights would glow golden at night, like Earth's campfires. One morning, as Marcus repaired a nearby generator, Rin came running toward him, laughter spilling from his lips. "Uncle Marcus! Come quick!" Marcus set his tools down and followed. "What's going on?" Rin pointed proudly at the patch of soil near the entrance. "It grew, the flower, it opened." Marcus crouched down beside the little plant. A delicate blue blossom had bloomed overnight, its petals glimmering faintly under the sun. "Well, look at that," he said softly. "You did it, little man." Sarah stepped forward, her expression tender. "It's from his father's seeds," she said. "They never grew before, until now." Marcus nodded slowly, feeling something heavy and warm in his chest. "Sometimes things just need the right soil," he said. That evening, the colony held its first community gathering since the storm. Tables were set up in the open square, and for the first time, humans and aliens worked side by side to serve food, fix lights, and laugh together. Children ran between the adults, playing in the dust. When Marcus and Sarah arrived, the crowd went quiet for a moment. Then someone began to clap, slowly at first, then faster. Others joined in. Corin, the alien who once shouted for Marcus to leave, stepped forward. His proud posture was softer now. "You built something that stood," he said, "and you stayed when no one else would." "For that I was wrong." Marcus gave a modest smile. "Takes more than storms to break good ground." Corin nodded, extending his hand, a gesture of respect in his culture. Marcus shook it firmly. Later that night, as the colony lights shimmered across the plain, Sarah and Marcus stood outside the new home, watching the others celebrate. Rin was playing tag with a group of human children, his laughter echoing like music. Sarah looked up at the stars. "He smiles again," she said softly. "He sleeps without fear now." Marcus smiled. "That's all I wanted." She turned to him. "And you? Will you leave soon?" He hesitated, looking toward his rover parked nearby. The company had already called for him twice. There were other colonies that needed repairs, other people waiting for help. But when he looked at the little house glowing behind Sarah, and the boy waving at him from the window, he couldn't bring himself to move. "I should," he said quietly, "but part of me doesn't want to." Sarah nodded slowly, her voice calm. "You built more than a home here, Marcus. You built peace," he smiled faintly. "Funny thing about peace, it feels harder to walk away from than war." She looked at him with a quiet warmth. "Then stay. Not as a builder, not as a human, just stay as you are." Marcus looked down, emotion tightening his throat. "And what if your people still don't trust me?" "Then they'll learn," she said firmly. "The same way I did." A soft wind passed between them, carrying the scent of flowers and metal. Marcus glanced at the little blue blossom swaying by the doorway, and felt something he hadn't felt since before he left Earth, a sense of belonging. He knelt beside Rin, who had run up, breathless and happy. "You did well today," Marcus said. Rin grinned. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" Marcus looked into those bright silver eyes and smiled. "Yeah, kid. I'll be here tomorrow." As night fell, the colony lights reflected across the dunes, bright and warm. The home stood steady, glowing against the dark horizon like a lighthouse. It wasn't just shelter from the storm. It was proof that compassion could rebuild what fear had broken. Sarah placed a hand on the doorway, whispering softly, "For those we lost and for those we found." Marcus stood beside her, watching the stars come out one by one. In that quiet moment, under 2 suns and 1,000 stars, they all understood something simple yet eternal. Home isn't made of walls or roofs. It's built from kindness that survives the storm.